Hello, I thought it was about time I made another so-called case study for the RUBE Box2D editor. So I made this walking robot mecha thing here to illustrate a concept that I've found myself using quite frequently in the last few projects that I've done, especially where I'm making a bipedal human kind of a structure that has limbs. And in a nutshell, the concept is to isolate the main points that you need to control and then let Box2D figure out where everything else in between is going to go. So in the case of this walker, we have the foot, or the 2 feet. That's the two of the main points. And then the other one is obviously the body. And everything in between it's kind of superficial to the movement, really. It's nice to look at, of course, but it doesn't play much of a part in the overall gameplay or anything like that. So as well as being easier to construct, this method also lets you separate the gameplay physics side of things that are important, the bodies and movement that's important to the gameplay, from the eye candy, so to speak, that's not important to the gameplay. So a better way to illustrate this perhaps is, or a simpler way, is the fighter from the Funny Fists game. So this is fully articulated 2D body, of course. And if I look at this in the editor view and I hold down D, I can see the relative densities of the bodies. So the brighter bodies are much higher density. And from this view we can see that there's only three, once again the same three bodies as in the Mecha Walker, that have any significant mass, and everything else just follows along in between. So this lets us do things like pick up this body and move it in our program code, and everything else in between will follow along and it will look nice. Well, as long as you don't do anything crazy with it. Another quite good example is from the Downhill Supreme games. If I hold down D here, we'll see once again, there's only three bodies that have any significant mass, and they are this one is actually the torso of the rider. It's a little bit offset to make the center of gravity lower. But so that's the torso of the rider, and then the two wheels are also have a little bit of mass that's significant, and then everything else is pretty much doesn't really matter. And that gives us quite a nice result in that, well, you can get the game and try it out if you like. But basically it looks quite real, and the guy moves around quite nicely. And even with this, what I would call dumb control, that is, I'm not actually controlling it in any way, I'm just going to let it roll down the hill completely just under the control of gravity, and you'll see that it actually does a pretty good job of making it look like realistic human movement. And Box2D is doing all of the work of interpolating these joints and doing the inverse kinematics and everything. So it's quite a nice technique, and I'm going to go over it with this mech, and I'll show you how I built this one up step by step. I'll try and make this case study a little bit shorter than the other one because there's no coding or scripting or anything necessary. So I'll just go over the steps that I took quite briefly, and I'll put the file in the link in the description if you want to try it out. By the way, this walker here, of course, I didn't draw that myself. I got that from a DeviantArt page here. It's by Lady Di, and hopefully she doesn't mind me using it here. There's a lot of cool stuff here, actually. So anyway, that's where that came from. I didn't draw it. Heck no. Anyway, so we start off, let me just turn joints on here. This is a so-called unicycle style of constructing a platform character. That's one way of doing it. I'm using a wheel joint here, so that lets us get a bit of, let me just adjust stuff here. So that gives us a bit of bounce. Oh, hold on. Just pause these. I'm uploading this in 60 frames per second, so hopefully it's going to look exactly for you as it does for me, which is, I thought I'd try doing 60 frames per second video for this one, because it is kind of important to show the smoothness of the movement. That's kind of the whole point of this exercise. In fact, I just had these other two player views playing, so the mecha that you saw walking there should have actually been a little bit smoother, I think. Anyway, so this is a typical unicycle, and it's just a box and a circle and a wheel joint, and I've got high friction on here so that when the wheel turns it moves along. So that's the first step, but obviously we want, let me just get rid of this stuff. Obviously we want to make it step, so the next thing I tried was to put a couple of bodies on the outer rim of the wheel so that when we play that we get a motion like this. And notice that now the wheel is not colliding with the ground, so I've turned the collision what do you call it, filter bits, category bits and mask bits, I've turned those, set those to be off for the collision between the ground and this body. So now we have a stepping motion, and it's going up and down, and we've got a little bit of bobbing motion from the weight at the top here. So it's a reasonable start, but it doesn't look very good the way the wheel is just going around in a perfect circle. So the next step I made was to, instead of using those two bodies on the outside of the rim directly, I attached a wheel joint to them and another body on top of that. So it's a little bit hard to see in this whole 2D view, but the wheel in the middle is attached to the smaller body in here, which is now a separate body. Before it was a fixture on this main body. So that's attached to there by a revolute joint, and this body, the interior body, is a fixed rotation body, so it cannot rotate relative to the world. And on the outside of that we have the larger fixture here is on a separate body, and that's connected to the the intermediate one by a wheel joint. So when we see this running, I'll just step through it a little bit slower. Oops, hold on. Let me just turn joints on here. So you can see that the relationship between those two bodies now is only ever going to be, they can only ever be vertical from each other. They can't, go sideways. And now that the weight is pushing down on the second wheel joint here, we allow the first body that we had on the outside to go under the ground, and that means that this body that's stuck on the edge of it is going to be pressed against the ground like that. So that gives us a nice way of sticking the foot to the ground, and then we can step over it, and there's a tiny little bit of slipping when it steps down and when it picks up again, but it's not too bad. But we still have the problem that the foot that goes over the top looks quite unrealistic in that it's doing a huge, almost perfect semicircle. Well, it is almost a semicircle, I think, but it doesn't look right. So we want to prevent it from coming up so high. So for the next step, I added a body here that has 0 friction on the fixture, and it's attached to the first main body with another wheel joint, except the central axis of the wheel joint is set a bit higher, and it's also attached to the main body by 2 distance joints, and those distance joints are set so that they will pull this bar downwards. Easiest way to see what I mean is probably just to look at it. So as the foot goes up, so this is trying to go upwards, it's trying to pull this one up as well, but the limiter is getting in the way. but the limiter is a little bit soft. It has some freedom to move, so we get the result like this. I'll just play it at normal speed here. So you can see now the foot doesn't go up as much, and it has a little bit more of a natural looking gait to it. So it also steps downwards quite vertically still, which is quite important. We wanted to keep that downwards motion at the end rather than trying to push the foot forwards at the end of the step, because that stops it from stepping up onto ledges and stuff. By the way, I should have mentioned that this control, the structure that I'm making, is not going to be a good one for like the main character of your game, I don't think. It's a bit tricky to control, like you wouldn't be running around platforms and jumping and stuff too much with this. But for, say, a side prop or something like this mech, maybe if it wasn't such an important part of the game, it would be okay to do something like this, I think. Anyway, so that gives us a fairly nice looking step. And I think this is about as far as I went with what I call the underlying gameplay relevant elements of the structure. That's all it really is. So to make this move here, I'm just setting the motor joint to turn this wheel, that's all. So it could be as simple as just letting your player turn this wheel backwards and forwards if you wanted to let them drive this thing. So the next thing I did was to work on the visual side of it. And we have here just 4 bodies, one for each piece of the leg and the foot, and the actual sizes of them, or the fixtures that they have, are irrelevant. So I've just made them all circles, and they're all the same mass so that they don't get too far out of whack when they're being positioned, and they're just connected by revolute joints like that in a chain. And I've just put I've just made the body at the top a static body so we can see. Just makes it a little bit easier to work on, see what's going on rather than having it drop down and fall through the ground, because none of these bodies are going to be colliding with the ground either. They're purely just to stick the images on. And over here I have the same thing. I just wanted to work on the foot a little bit over here, so I made this a static body as well and added the foot pieces here. We can just see the foot is allowed to move around a little bit like that, and the revolute joints on here have a little bit of limiting on them. I also tried putting distance joints on here to make them like to sort of pull them down like that when the foot was off the ground, but these pieces here are very, very small. I don't know if you can see in the video, but the blue grid lines here are 0.1 units. So these are actually less than 0.1 units. So we're getting into the small sizes that Box 2D doesn't deal with very well. So I just left them loose like that, and it seems to work reasonably well. So anyway, to stick this onto our gameplay relevant elements, this case is fairly simple. The fighter that I showed you, the boxer earlier, was a little bit different because I actually made that with using the visible pieces as the gameplay pieces as well. So this is the first time I've tried a completely separate model like this. But all we need to do is stick the main body at the top to the main body at the top of this one, and then the foot to the foot at the bottom there. And I'm using revolute joints here. This is not good enough, but I just wanted to show this step of it as I progressed. I've also put a motor joint here between the main body at the top and the foot, and that is to keep the foot tilted a little bit upwards as it moves, as he picks his foot up and moves it forward, rather than letting the foot just sort of dangle around freely, because now it's just a revolute joint with no limits. I'm using the motor joint to sort of hold it in a certain angle while he's lifting his foot forward. And this gives us the result like this. I'm just going to step through this one frame at a time because I want you to see what happens when these two bodies, these two structures snap together. So this is the first frame, and you can see this is not very good, so obviously we're going to have to do something about this. If we let it step through a bit, it eventually sort of gets to a point where everything is okay, and you can see the foot is now come back to how it should be. It's still a little bit jittery here, isn't it? But you can see the foot is being held at a 20-degree angle or 30-degree angle or something. I forget what I set it to. But that's what the motor joint is doing. It's holding it at that angle as it steps forward. So the angle should be fairly constant throughout the step. Let's do it slowly. So as soon as it has room to, it's being held at 30 degrees. So that's what I mean about the motor joint. It's a little bit jittery, isn't it? But anyway, it works okay, but that first horrible snap at the beginning is not good enough. So what did I do next? Okay, another problem with this one, as we'll see if I let it settle a little bit. Now if I pick this up, if I let this go off the ground, you can see that the foot being quite heavy, because remember this is one of the densest parts of the structure. Everything else in between is very light, so it doesn't get pulled up here by these joints correctly. It's free to fall down until the distance joints reach the limit of their stretchiness, and then they finally hold it at this position. But we don't want that. So we want some kind of a hard limit to stop this foot from getting too far below the body. So that's what these two rope joints here are for, and they just limit the maximum distance that the foot can get away from the main body at this point here. And the only other thing I've changed here, I think, is to add another leg, and I've just tinted the colors a little bit darker here to make it look like it's in the background. Oh, I did change the toes here as well. I made them a little bit bigger, and I think this tends to stop the jittering because now they're bigger than, well, the 0.1 size for fixtures is not really any kind of a hard limit. It's just a recommendation. But following the recommendation, I made these larger than 0.1. So now they are less jittery. So anyway, let's see how that runs. And once again, we're going to have this horrible snapping at the beginning as everything jumps into place. We also have the knee joints, or the elbows, going backwards. They look like knees. They should look like elbows. It doesn't look too bad. But it's not right. It's not what we want. And it looks like the toes of the back foot are not going to recover from that situation. So anyway, we need to work on this snapping problem. Obviously the first thing to do is just put all these images on top of where they're going to be to start with anyway. So we can try that, and that gets us this result. Much better. And we still have one of the legs backwards, but we managed to settle out that first situation where everything's all higgledy-piggledy. We got past that much quicker. One thing we can do in the RUBE editor that's quite nice is you can step a selection of bodies using the physics simulation in the editor view. So as an example of that, what I did here is I made the endpoint bodies static, so that's the body at the top, and then these two feet bodies are all static. And if I also select the bodies in the middle that I want to settle, then I can do step selected bodies, So that will step everything that I've selected. And 60 steps will be 1 second. It shouldn't take that long, but I'll run for 60 steps anyway. And what that does is it just runs the physics simulation, and we get a sort of a inverse kinematics result where it just pulls those joints to where they will be once the simulation starts running. And the other thing I've changed here is I manually moved these bodies here into position. So these are the toes and the foot, and on this side as well. So I just manually shifted those to where they're going to be when they start. Alright, let's see what we get with this. First step, oh look at that, almost nothing moved. Because we're already... Oh, what's going on? Oh, it's static. I'm sorry. This is the wrong one. Nothing moves because it's static, right? Okay, this is what I wanted to show here. Okay, so first step, still almost nothing moves, right? So everything is pretty much in the place where it needs to be already. We still have this problem here where the knee at the front manages to get in the wrong orientation because it's being pulled, this whole leg is being pulled forwards and around by the wheel, and right at the moment where it kind of straightens the leg out, the knee is still moving forward. It has a little bit of forward momentum, and right at that point the foot hits the ground and pushes it forwards, and I don't think we ever really recover from that afterwards. And it also screws up the foot. The foot kind of gets upside down, and it doesn't have enough time to turn itself back the right way before the next foot hits the ground. The next step hits the ground, rather. So, as the last step, I did something that I did a lot of for the bike game, and that is to add a couple of joints, rope joints again, and they go from the knee or the elbow of, well, you could put it on either this bottom leg body or the upper leg body, it doesn't really matter, but I put it on the bottom leg body because that's closer to my end point. So it's joining this bottom limb from the elbow, and it's connecting it way out to a point out here, which is pretty much just an arbitrary point, but it needs to be on the back side of the elbow. And the reason I put it so far away is because when it's far away, the radius of that rope joint's limit, which is the green line here, becomes kind of a straight line almost. So I didn't really want it to be too round. Just to illustrate that, if I bring it in here, if it's very close, then well, I need to change the limits too, but alright, let's do that. If it's very close, we have a kind of a roundy curve, which I didn't really need or want. So let's put that back out there. So anyway, when we run that, we'll see, just turn joints on. Now when we step through the first few steps, we'll see that the elbow gets arrested here. So it didn't, start again. Steps. So it hits this rope joint limit and it can't get any further forwards. So if I just continue to let this run here, we stop that problem before it even starts. And it will also prevent it from happening again in any other situations. Maybe, say if he steps down a step, we're not going to see that problem anymore. So anyway, that's pretty much it. It's started to get a fair bit more complicated than what we started with just the unicycle. But hopefully it's interesting to see how something like this can be put together. And this is still what I would call a dumb structure. Like there's no control. I'm not telling it what to do. All it's doing to move is it has that one motor joint, wheel joint that's turning that wheel, and that's all it is. And yet it still manages to look pretty good. So what I said earlier about you won't be able to use this in your game as a main character, I wouldn't think. least it wouldn't be very good. You'd have to do a fair bit more work than this, I would expect. As an example of why you wouldn't want to do that, at least you wouldn't want to do it if you were running along terrain like this, is what I meant to say. If it's flat terrain, you should be fine. But let's just run let's run this on here and see what we get. Steps down okay, but then we didn't really have enough clearance or enough time to get the foot into the right place before the next to get the toes into the right place before the foot came down on the next step. Fortunately, it does manage to recover, but then we're going to have more problems here. Friction is going to be an issue. The friction of the foot piece and the ground piece are both 1 here, so you can't really make it any too much more higher friction than that. We're starting to get jitters and glitches. On this kind of a slope, we do just have enough friction to get past, but if we turn all these fixtures off, unfortunately we can't see the ground anymore, but you begin to see that it's not really going to cut it for like a player controlled vehicle walking on uneven ground. This is okay. I think we're back on flat ground here. Let me just get his feet back. There we go. I think this is just flat ground here. Anyway, so you can get the file for this from the link in the description and try it out in RUBE if you want to take a look, or just play around with it and see it in the player yourself on your own computer at full resolution and full proper 60 frames per second. Although, like I say, this video is 60 frames per second, but I haven't actually tried that on YouTube yet, so I'm not sure how it's going to work out. Hopefully it works out fine. Anyway, thanks for watching. Oh, he's come to the end of his ground. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.